Yo, and shout out to the Maha Minute, shout out to Spinks, Josh, everybody involved. This is what community looks like, so thank you very much.
Maha Minute, #1 podcast in the universe. We live in Denver, Colorado with Neal Walia. What's going on, man?
Not much. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this interview.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
This is exclusive. I haven't done a politician interview so this is.
I feel very honored, and I'm hoping I can start what's a good chapter maybe of this happening going forward. But I'd like to think of myself more as a community member before a politician. Okay. But I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for giving me the honor.
No problem. I think it'll be great for the people. You know what I'm saying? Get to watch, learn some things.
Yes.
So very informative interview, and I'm excited for it.
Thank you.
Let's get into your story. So originally, where were you born?
Yeah. Before I get there, I think it's probably better to tell a story about my parents first, and I can give people an idea of where we come from and kind of my roots. So I'm the son of Indian immigrants. I'm the first person in my family to be born in the United States. And when I was about 13 years old, my parents took us back to India to visit extended family in Old Delhi. And one afternoon, they wanted to take us out onto a bazaar. And if you can picture what India looks like, you'll know that a bazaar means dirt roads. It means stores on your right, your left, literally tens of thousands of people as far as your eyes can see. And, we were working our way through a crowd, and I remember we happened to stumble upon this young boy. He had to have been the same age as me. Same age, I had hair back then, so same haircut, same eyes, and yet here this young man was absolutely begging for his life without a single piece of clothing on his body. And I remember looking at him in that moment and asking myself, how is it possible that this kid who comes from the same country of origin as I do, the same heritage, the same culture, has absolutely nothing? And yet I got to go home every single night to a roof over my head, to food on my plate, and to clothes on my back. And I've never stopped thinking about that boy. And the real tragedy of this story is that young man's story is now happening right here in Denver, Colorado. And that is the reality that my parents escaped from, to come to this country in pursuit of what was known as the American dream. And, like my parents, I've taken all the steps that I've been told that would allow me to build a better life for me and my loved ones. And, I know we're going to get into this a little bit more, but, I'm someone who's been very fortunate in the sense that I was able to go to undergrad at CU Boulder, grad school at CU Denver. I have 2 master's degrees. Taught students for 2 years. I worked for the former governor of Colorado on a team that was focused on fighting homelessness. And that took me out to D.C., where I spent about 5 years of my career working in and out of the halls of Congress on Cap Hill. And yet, in spite of all of these steps, like many of us, maybe some of you right now, I feel like my life is in a more vulnerable place than it's ever been. And what I mean by that is my wife and I were currently being crushed by a lifetime of student debt. We can't afford to buy a home in the city that we love. The cost of childcare is something that is actively delaying our own ability to begin our family. And now our parents, my dad is 70. My mom is, I won't say her age out of respect to my mom, but they're both public school teachers here in Colorado, and they've actively delayed their retirement, not only because of their own economic insecurity, but I think like a lot of people in their age right now, they're asking themselves a very important question, which is, do I still have a role left to play in shaping the future of my kids and my grandkids? And so it was really feeling all these pressures in my own life and knowing that there are millions of Americans across this country who are going through the same thing that I'm going through, if not completely worse. That's the reason I'm running. I think our communities deserve to have someone who lives the struggles of their neighborhoods, of their communities, but more importantly, will fight to fix them as if their lives depended on it, because my life does. And so that's a little bit about my family. That's where we come from. But my parents originally immigrated to this country in the 80s. They first started in Canada. And just so y'all are aware, my parents were educated in India. But when you're an immigrant and you come over here, you lose your education. Like, they don't hire you based on the degrees you get in places like India. So they had to come to Canada. They had to get their degrees again. And thankfully, after spending some time in Canada, getting their master's and their education and all that stuff, they finally were one of the few immigrants who, I mean, maybe not few in terms of how many immigrants are currently here, but at that time, like, there are way more immigrants who don't get access into this country than they do.
Right.
They got a green card. My dad was lucky enough to get a job, and then with the right visa, we landed in Seattle, Washington. And so that's where I was born, in a very, like, 90s immigrant Seattle neighborhood, and I grew up there until I was about 11 years old, and that's when we moved out to Colorado.
Okay. That's a dope story.
Thanks, man.
Let's get back into it.
Okay,
so,
cool.
You said you moved to Denver around a wedding.
Colorado, not Denver. I've lived in Denver for about 7 years, but I actually grew up in Douglas County in Highlands Ranch. So my parents moved us out here in 1999.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, that was a pretty sharp contrast to what I was growing up in, right? Like, my neighborhood, my school, predominantly, like, people of color. Like, that was what life in Seattle was. And then when you move to a place like Highlands Ranch, it's a bit different, right? And all of a sudden, my sister and I are the only two brown-skinned kids in, like, an entire school full of white children, right? And I think, unfortunately for us, in terms of timing, 9/11 happens, like, right when we get here. And in Douglas County, which is obviously not just predominantly white, but, like, very conservative, very sheltered, that birthed a very, I think, close relationship to what racism meant to us.
Right.
And I know as kids, I don't think you really, like, know the true.
It takes a while for you.
You grow up, and I think it allows you to backtrack and, like, remember experiences that you had, right? But I've seen not only my parents, be verbally abused and threatened and stuff like that, but, like, even my sister and I were, like, verbally assaulted, like, physically assaulted, been in a lot of fights and stuff like that. And so, it was tough, right? Like, that's what junior high was for me. That was high school for me. And I think one of the things that always made it, not better, but I think gave me the ability to heal and process these things along the way. My parents have always made a very intentional effort to connect us to our roots, our community. And so the Indian community of Colorado is not necessarily as big as what you would see in a place like Cali, Jersey, Texas, but it's still a strong community here in Colorado. And so growing up, like, Monday through Thursday always used to be Highlands Ranch, but, like, Thursday through Friday was all Aurora, Denver, pretty much where all the brown people were, man. So I do feel fortunate that I got to grow up with that. Like, at least I had people, friends who looked like me, who were going through the same thing that I was going through, that I could share with, process these things. And so, it was challenging, right? It's still challenging, but I've always been benefited by having, like, a very large community behind me, and that's a big reason for why I'm here today right now.
Right. Okay. What high school did you go to?
Went to Mountain Vista High School.
Okay.
And I was legit the second class of Mountain Vista. So, like, this is back in the day cafe, right?
Yeah.
Like, when we moved to Highlands Ranch, it was, like, a lot of open space at that time. Like, it wasn't, like, the mega suburb of, like, Colorado, but when I was a freshman, I only had sophomores ahead of me. And so it wasn't until I was a junior in Mountain Vista that I knew what it meant to have, like, a full high school. But that's where I went to high school.
Okay. How did you end up becoming a Democrat instead of a Republican?
I think it's mostly based on life experiences, right? Yeah. And I think that growing up, I mean, one, my parents are very progressive in general, right? And, like, my family comes from a long history of public service. So going back even before my parents, like, my grandparents on my mom's side were in the Indian Army. Yeah. And so, that was something that kind of was a part of our culture growing up. And then my dad's dad was actually a member of a political party in India called Congress. Right. I know we call that, like, the chamber here, but in India, the party's called Congress. And so that is a progressive party by Indian standards out there. And so politics and kind of talking about culture, community, and, like, what's happening in the world has always been our household. And so I think my perspective on things was shaped by my dad. And then, as you grow up, you learn more about politics and public service. And I think especially as someone who does come from a background that I would describe as being, marginalized, oppressed at certain times. You know, I think that for me, the Democratic Party, at least growing up, was like the People's Party.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of debate to the efficacy of either party right now in Washington, D.C., but for me, that was always it, you know, and I think that's probably where I got my inspiration to become a Democrat and just I think more progressively about issues in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
But like, I'll say this, like, it's not like I don't have like an aversion. I mean, to party politics, right? Like the Republican Party as it stands with, I think, the Trump influence, the MAGA influence, it's become very different than what I think I see in like Republican people.
Okay.
Right? Like I don't see the party representing what conservatives out here typically represent. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are definitely more extremists, I think, than there were, but for me, like, conservatives growing up was never like, I'll just say, like, my community is like a small business community, right? And so it's always about the money. Like, and if you're coming from a country like India, where government is a failure, the idea of like social rights, values, is not like what it is out here. You know, you come to this country and then the only thing that you have that guarantees you anything in this life, especially in America, it's the dollar. Right? If you don't got money, nothing can happen. And when people come to this country, it's money will allow me to get an education. It'll allow me to build for my family, get a house, open my business. And I think a lot of people who come from our part of the world, when they come here, like, that is what they know. It is survival. And the reality is that there is only one party that offers the tax breaks, and there's one that doesn't. And, you know, that's the Republican Party. And so a lot of people in my community are conservative, but that's because they need money. It's a fiscal conservatism. They don't, I think, vibe with, like, the culture of the Republican Party, but it definitely more lines up with the economics of how they think, you know?
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. I want to dive more into your background a little bit. So you went to Mount Vista, and then you said you went to CU and CU Denver. Were you interested in politics back at school too, or
a little bit?
Politics kind of come about?
So I did a lot of things, and so like, I played sports. You know, I should say, like, I played sports growing up. I hooped a lot. I played a lot of soccer. Had one good year in freshman year where I played basketball, but that's where my career ended. Everybody grew, everybody got bigger, and I was like, shoot, man, like I can't hang with these people anymore. And so at that time, I kind of got a little more engaged, I think, on like the civics. I got into speech and debate. Obviously, is a skill that has helped me even to this day. Got very involved in newspaper, and so that kind of was like my framework in high school. And I think it made my choice of getting involved in political science and international affairs, which is what I ended up studying at Boulder, like a pretty clear choice. Like it just aligned with kind of what I was doing in high school, and so went to CU. High school, after my short-term basketball career ended, definitely made me more civically engaged with like newspaper, speech and debate, and I think that kind of framed what I wanted to get into, at least when it came to my education. And so I got to Boulder and I studied political science, international affairs, and college was tough for me my first year. I did not study. I indulged on the other side of the equation. I actually got kicked out my first year. Straight up. I did so bad academically that the University of Colorado Boulder basically said, if you do not go back to like CU Denver or Metro and take a full credit load of 12 credits and get a 4.0, like, you will not be admitted back into the university.
Wow.
Yeah, my parents were pissed. As you can imagine, Indian parents take education very seriously. But, you know, that summer I grinded. You know, I used to take the bus from Highlands Ranch to CU Denver every day, and I managed to do it. Like, I pulled it off somehow. Got back into the university, and I like studied a little bit more so I didn't get kicked out again. But like, I've always been more in like the community and the people stuff, and so I think my real education at CU Boulder was about being involved in like the student group scene. So I got really involved with the South Asian Student Association, worked my way up to becoming president. That actually ended up getting me elected into student government. And so that was college. You know, I was very involved. And a good lesson that I learned at CU Boulder was, you know, I didn't realize how Caucasian it would be. Like, I thought I was leaving that shit in Highlands Ranch, you know? And I got to Boulder, I was like, man, this is wider than fucking Highlands Ranch is. You know what I mean? Like, But when you're in that student group scene, you can't stick in your own lane, right? Like, there are not enough South Asians for me, like, as president, to mobilize enough people to throw successful events, do the types of things that we were supposed to do. Like, you have to learn how to stand with other people. And I think the learning lesson I was able to process early was that, you know, build allyship, build coalition. And so, you know, we spread and we connected with like the Latino Student Association, BSA, every other, I think, minority group that existed. And that's what made college, I think, exceptionally like profound for me, was just learning from an early age about different people's cultures, struggles, stories, building real friendship with different types of people. And so, you know, that was college for a little while. In international affairs, you got to choose a region that you want to focus. So I did Asia. And then they said, you have to take a language requirement. And I was like, oh, here I go. And then I was like, I'm going to do Hindi, right? That's what my parents speak at home. I grew up speaking it. And my mom was like, if you pay a single penny to study your native tongue, I would literally kick you out of my house. And I was like, but Ma, it's like a 4.0, you know what I mean? Like, guaranteed A, like, let's do it. She was like, no, don't do that shit. And I was like, okay. So I ended up studying Japanese. And that was mostly just because, like, growing up in Seattle, there's like a very strong East Asian demographic. Had a lot of East Asian friends. Japanese culture was something that I just had interest in. I also grew up watching a lot of anime and stuff like that. So I was like, all right, let me study this. It went well. And then I graduated college and I dipped and I moved to Japan for 2 years. And so, and like, that was really funny because, you know, you take 6 semesters there and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I know this shit. I'm good. And then I get off the plane and I was like, oh, I know nothing. Like, none of this makes sense. Like, obviously I didn't learn as much as I should. They also teach you how to speak like a robot when you're in college. It's not how, like, people speak, right? Like,
would you say it's more like politically correct, I suppose?
100%. It's like business Japanese. Right. But I'm like, when you're out in like a, like how we're talking now, you know, there's dialect, there's slang, there's different cultures that impact your language. And so where I moved was a very rural part of the country, a part that was very disconnected. It wasn't like a Tokyo kind of situation. It was farmland Japan, like old school. And so there was no English. And I think that was a blessing because it forced me to learn that language very, very quickly. And so by the end of 2 years, I became conversationally fluent, which was cool. But like initially, I'd say it was a bit of a challenge because, you know, Japan is a very, I would describe, sheltered country. And I think because of World War II and obviously the American military occupation of Okinawa, they have a very harsh attitude towards Westerners, Western cultures, pretty much anyone who's not from Japan. And like, obviously that's not unique to just Japan. That's that's everywhere, right? Yeah. But I think what made my experience a little bit different, because people were like, you're the first person who I've ever met that is not Japanese, period. Let alone like a man of color, because they grew up seeing white people typically, right? I think having that baseline Japanese made it a lot easier because they saw like, oh, he's trying. He's actually like, you know, and it made it a lot easier to make friends. And like, it was good, man. I loved it. Lived there for 2 years, traveled a lot. And then I came back to Denver, and that's when my time here kind of started. Okay. Yeah.
Were you like working just kind of random stuff in Japan, or were you still in the, politics?
I was teaching at that time, yeah. So like, if you're going out to Japan and if you don't know Japanese fluently, the only job you're going to be getting is an English teacher. Like straight up, like straight up. That's it. And like, there are a lot of people who make good money doing that. Like there are people who go out there to teach English and then they work their way up. Then they start teaching at like the university level and they start to cake. And then they never leave because it's like, it's not like the hardest kind of occupation, and like it's cool living in a different country, and like it's a dope spot to live, you know. But for me, like that just wasn't like the long term, you know. I always knew I wanted to be back here. I wanted to be present in Denver, and I spent 2 years and came back home.
Okay. So when you came back, what were your initial footsteps and plans, you know?
So the reason I was able to come back, or the reason that brought me back, was I got into grad school. So I applied to CU Denver. Got into their program, and so that's when I first moved into Denver. I lived in Cap Hill with my sister for about 3 years.
Place to live, for sure.
Yeah, and this was like 2013 to 2016, right? So Cap Hill hasn't changed a lot. Obviously, Denver changed a lot since then, you know. But I lived literally on the same block I worked, so I got into school immediately got an internship at the governor's office in the state capitol.
Okay.
And so I don't even, the funniest part is I lived literally 2 minutes walking distance from my job, and I was late every single day. Like, I don't even know how that happened, but that was like what it was, you know? And started interning there for like a whopping $0 an hour. That's like the wackest part about politics, by the way, is that when you get in, whether it's at like the state level, the federal level, right, they always have you start at zero. And I can never understand this because I'm like, who can work for $0 an hour?
Right.
And, you know, and Denver wasn't what it was today. Like, it's not as expensive, but like the point still remains, like, if you're a working class person, if you have to work to live, like, you're not afforded, you can't do these things, right?
Right.
And thankfully I was privileged enough to have saved like a lot of money when I was in Japan, just because my lifestyle wasn't exactly as, I'd say, as fun as it is now, you know, but it was hard, you know, and thankfully after a couple months I got a full-time job. Okay. And so for 3 years I did grad school full-time and I worked full-time for the governor, and that was tough. I would not recommend that to anybody. Like, just full-time grind is tough, man. So yeah, it was good though, man. I mean, I worked on a team that focused on the homeless situation. Mm-hmm. And again, back then it was different. Like, it was a problem, you know what I mean? But it was not this. Like, what we have now is a crisis. Back then it was still somewhat contained, isolated to like lower downtown, kind of around like Colfax and Broadway, where they, you know, drop off a lot of people whenever they re-enter back into society and stuff, you know, but that was it. And it was good, man. I mean, I think like the thing I was able to do, because I wasn't like top tier position, right? I went from intern to like executive assistant and then like basic program coordinator. And you don't get paid the big bucks. You're very much working for other people, but it was empathy more than anything. Because yeah, and like when you're working with people who are homeless, I think like the thing we've been conditioned in this country is to think of the unhoused as not people, as not people who have our story or have our backgrounds. And like when I would talk to some people who were unhoused, I mean, these were people who said, oh, I lost everything in the 2008 financial crisis. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I was in between jobs. I didn't have health care, and I got into a crazy car accident. And then I had to go into a hospital for like a $200,000 operation, and it bankrupted me, right? Like, these were people who were economically secure, but then life happened, and then all of a sudden you find yourself on the streets. And that, of course, I think changes you, and then it does, unfortunately, I think, birth decision-making and patterns of behavior that you wouldn't normally make. But like, you know, when you're homeless, like what else are you going to do? So that was important for me, to just learn about Denver, be in Denver, spread my roots, did a bunch of programs in the community. There's this really great organization in North Denver. It's called Servicios de la Raza, one of like the oldest Chicano organizations here, very focused on community, homelessness, just like growth, you know? And so that connected me with a lot of different like communities in Denver, predominantly on the west side though, right? Like mostly kind of like the Latinx Chicano community, but then also like the very vibrant Asian community that exists on that side. And so then I got involved on the industry side with some other programs as well. I did this thing at the Metro Chamber of Commerce, and that took me more into other parts of the city that I just wasn't familiar with on the business side, you know, and that allowed me to become more acquainted with, you know, neighborhoods like Five Points, right? Neighborhoods like lower downtown, places that did have, you know, a business culture that I think stuck out for people in a good way. Right. And so that's when my like awareness of Denver, who was here, the neighborhoods kind of started. And I also had the privilege of joining what was called the Asian Advisory Council for the governor. Like, it was always a big deal for me to try to connect my people to government, because like growing up, I never really felt like that connectivity was there. Right. So for me, when I was there, I was like, I will connect my people. I will get them involved. I will make sure they know what resources are on the table for them, how to navigate that space, and just kind of inspire people to become more engaged. And yeah, I did that for 3 years, man. That was life for a while. Okay. That's good.
All right. I want to get into some just basic questions as far as politics go. What are some of the pros and cons of a two-party system? I know it's
hard to think of a lot of pros right now, to be honest, right? There are a lot of consequences, and I think we're experiencing fully what that means. But like, the problem is not just the party. It's also the deep-rooted relationship corporations have with our politics. Like, Citizens United was one of the most detrimental Supreme Court decisions that have ever taken place, because what it did is it treated the corporation as a person. It allowed corporations to fund political campaigns. And now what you're seeing happen in Washington, D.C. is a Democratic Party that says it's of the people, that has progressive messaging, and a Republican Party that is conservative in nature, more, unfortunately, toxic than it used to be. But they're funded by the same corporations, right? And that is why DC nothing gets done, is because it is gridlock. And that's by design. Because what corporations want more than everything is for the world to not change, for exploitation to continue, for them to continue recording record-breaking profits while working class people get treated like shit, right? Like, that is what everything is about in DC. It's money. Right? And people will try to tell you that it's about public service. They'll try to tell you it's about community. If you are in Washington, D.C., the number one thing people talk about in politics, it's cash. That's it. So I think the biggest consequence that we're seeing right now is a two-party system put the corporation over the community. And, I mean, you can look outside to see what's happening here, right? Like, we've got a housing crisis in which home ownership is out of reach for more people than it's ever been. Our healthcare system literally bankrupts people every single day because of the privatized model of healthcare that we have. We have both Democrats and Republicans in this state who say they care about the environment, but these are people taking money from Xcel Energy, from Suncor, from some of the most toxic polluters in our state. And that damage is clear. We had the biggest wildfire we've ever had as a state in the winter of last year. Think about that. It was snowing, and then almost 1,000 homes and businesses burned to the ground in like 6 hours. If you go to Globeville in Elyria, Swansea, you were talking about, and again, BIPOC communities predominantly, brown communities in particular. On one side is highway construction, which is creating terrible air quality for these neighbors. On the other side, Purina dog chow factory. Have y'all driven by that? Oh my! I know exactly, right? It is disgusting. It smells exactly how you think a dog factory or a dog food factory would smell. And then you've got it. And then on the other side, it's Suncor. It's like these oil and gas refineries, right? And so you are being hit by air toxicity, by water contamination, and it's no secret that the health crises of these neighborhoods and the outcomes are so poor. And, you know, that is a product of both parties being owned by oil and gas. And, like, look, it's because also we're one of, I think, 10 oil and gas producing states across the country, right? Yeah. That industry is deep locked in the political system, and that's why we can't change these outcomes and why they're getting worse and worse. So, you know, the general answer to your question is it's hard for me to think of the positives of a two-party system, especially when, you know, the quality of life for so many of us is getting worse. Yeah. You know? Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel like you almost have to choose a party in today's politics to get?
Yeah. Yes, you have to. And like that's the sad reality of it, right? Because I'm a first-time candidate, right? I've never run for office before. Also, on my first time, I said I'm not going to take corporate money, which is what they describe as political suicide. Because, you know, my opponent, who is corporate backed, her budget is like $1.52 million. And, you know, that's big money. Right. That's money to buy TV ads. That's money to buy robocalls. That's money to essentially get your story and word out without spending a single day in the community. They want to buy their way into getting voted for, right? That's what I have to go against. But for me, I couldn't be a part of the problem that I saw, right? Like, I do not want to run a campaign. I don't want to be the kind of elected official that I think is destroying our country. So,
who is your opponent?
Her name is Congresswoman Diana DeGette. So Congresswoman DeGette has been in office, this is her 26th year. Yeah. For context, we've never had a person of color represent Denver in the halls of Congress, and that's astonishing to me because Denver is built on the labor of BIPOC communities. Like, the culture that is here has been created by our neighborhoods, and it's a thing that attracts so many people to come here. You know, but in the history of federal politics, not a single person of color has taken that step forward. So Congresswoman DeGette, you know, she's been in office for 25 years, and you know, I think is someone who unfortunately has become a part of the machine. Like, when you're in office for 25 years, even if you come from your neighborhood, even when she started, right? I think she was energetic. I think she had a progressive vision, and she was one of the few women in Congress at that time, one of the few legal backgrounds that were in Congress, especially for women who were in Congress. And she was one of the loudest voices on reproductive rights. And she deserves credit for kind of ushering that into the national dialogue. But like I said, after you spend 25 years in DC and you become a part of the institution, you take the millions and millions of dollars from the corporations that are crippling our country. Like,
how much are you actually?
What are you going to do, right? Like, you're not making any change at this stage. And so the reason I'm running for this position is because, one, it goes back to me believing that people who live the struggles of their constituents should be the ones representing them. I do believe it's time for us to make history and put a person of color into that seat. But also, people should know that this district, Denver, it's D+57. And what that means is we are scored as one of the most progressive districts in the United States. Like, a Republican cannot win in Denver because there is not enough support for the Republican Party here. So if you have that privilege, I think it is incumbent upon anyone in that seat to be the most forward-thinking, dynamic, progressive person in the country. And unfortunately, I don't see that spirit being representative, right? And that translates into the policies I care about, because I believe in what's called the Green New Deal. It is the most aggressive step away from oil and gas. It is a real commitment to a renewable green economy, and my opponent does not believe in that. And it's no secret because one of her biggest financiers is Xcel Energy, right? She can't support this. It's not in the cards for her. Same thing with the conversation of healthcare. Healthcare is a human right. I don't care who you are. I don't care what the status of your citizenship is. I don't care what the color of your skin is. Healthcare is a human right no matter what. Unfortunately, my opponent in the past has advocated against single-payer health and takes more money from big pharmaceutical companies and private healthcare companies who finance and benefit off of the corporate model that we have. And so her voice on this issue is quiet. And that unfortunately translates across the board on a lot of different issue areas. And so for me, it's about making sure that we achieve our potential as a district and start not only doing these transformational things because our neighborhoods need them, but also have questions and answer questions and be part of conversations that we're not in. And one of the things that, you know, I've appreciated about our partnership is like, how can we talk about racial equity and racial justice, right? How can we really become champions of different types of reparations for Black communities, Indigenous communities, and, you know, really, I think, kind of become the role model of how we should be operating as a government. So those are a number of reasons for why I think, you know, I'm the right step forward for our communities.
Okay. How much money did you raise without corporate help?
Closing in on $200,000.
Jeez, okay.
And that's the thing, man. Like, thousands of people have donated to my campaign. Like, working people. Like, I'm not getting big dollar contributions, right? These are people throwing me $25, $50. I've got people who have given me $1. And that means so much to me. Because I'm like, I know you don't have it. And yet, this campaign has made you feel something where you're taking even just $1, which is obviously at that moment probably a more significant resource for them than it is for the campaign, and are like, I still want to be a part of this. And that's amazing, right? Like, that's such a powerful thing. And like, I hope we can win on that model. Like, I hope we can show people that you don't have to sell out. You don't have to take the money. Like, you can come from a working class background. You can be racially oppressed your entire life. You can go through the struggle. And yet, if you have community, if you have a voice, if if you have people who are behind you and you are trying to do the right thing, you cannot just compete in these elections, but you can win. And that's something that I'm hoping we can do, because I think at this moment in time, it's necessary. I think there's such a lack of hope. I think there's such a lack of motivation to think about getting involved in politics, to get involved in public service. And I'm hoping this can kind of snap us into a new chapter,
Okay, that's dope. I like the progressive way of thinking. You don't really hear that too much. It just seems like it's all sold out with corporations.
It does, yeah. I agree with that, man.
Okay. So I know you brought up a couple different policies, but what are some of the ones that you feel most important to your campaign?
Yeah, I mean, everything we advocate for is rooted in transformation. Mm-hmm. Mostly economic transformation, though, right? Because the economy is hurting all of us right now, right? We know businesses are shutting down. We know families are paying more than they've ever paid for the quality of life that they have. And, we have people who are getting kicked out of their homes and apartments every single day, right? Like that's what Denver is becoming. And so there are a couple things that we really care about. I care about homelessness, obviously. That's something that's personally connected to me, but I also think when it comes to the housing crisis and what we're experiencing here, it is top of mind for everybody. Right. And so for me, what we have to do is put people into homes. But that requires some major federal investments. And to frame the problem here in Colorado, there are a couple things that are really harming us. We have this state tax framework. It's called TABOR. It's called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And what this does is it locks in the state government budget into a level that was created in the 90s. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
What we're required to do is if we go above that revenue mark, we reimburse the community with a check. But historically, that check is translated into like $20, $50 per person. And so I think because people in the past were more conservative, that seemed like a better option. And also like $50 back in the 90s was like a lot more than $50 is right here, right? Yeah. But what's happened since the 90s? This state has quintupled, quadrupled in population. It's grown. And unfortunately, the state government dollars that would normally be invested into, let's say, homes, roads, healthcare, all of that, education, it's not there. It's not meeting the needs of our growth. And that's apparent in our society right now. Right. We also have a state ban on rent control. You cannot cap rent or limit rent in this state. And unfortunately, what that allows is for the market to dictate what's affordable and what's not. And of course, with a growing population, with inflation, with wealthy people all over this country migrating to Colorado, the cost of living, the cost of rent will grow with that. And that's why we're seeing these crises unfold before our eyes. And so for us, if we know that the state government, if we know local government doesn't have the sauce to do what it needs to do, then the federal government needs to come in and invest not small dollars. I'm talking about multi-billion-dollar investments into affordable housing, but also permanent supportive housing for people who are unhoused. Mm-hmm. The first step of ending homelessness, whether you're talking to someone who's an expert on the ground, nationally, it's putting people into homes. From there, healthcare has to be treated as a human right. And that's not just because of the value add, but if we want to put it in context to the housing crisis and the homeless crisis, we know that some of our unhoused neighbors have gone through the harshest experiences that a person can go through. We're talking about addiction, mental health issues. We're talking about, even people who are coming back from like war and things like that. Being put into a home and expecting someone to heal is a misguided idea, but with access to healthcare, mental health services, then you can take that step forward. Right. And I think the final piece of the big pillars we advocate for, it's in the Green New Deal, right? And the Green New Deal is a new economy, right? It is multi-billion-dollar investments into infrastructure, roads, education, things that can turn us into a more sustainable society. So for example, that could look like, investments being made into even this building that would take it off of like an oil and gas dependency and put it onto electric, solar, something like that. Like These are the concepts we're trying to advocate for. And when you're trying to build that new world, you need jobs. I mean, you need a lot of jobs to create that sustainable planet. And that's where the federal government can come in and do things that I think the private sector will not do. You can pay people $20 an hour, which for the record is a livable wage now. $15 in Denver, you can't make it on 15.
Yeah.
If you ain't making, I read this study by MIT that said, if you are a single person in Denver without children, if you're not making $21 an hour, you're not making a livable wage. That's crazy.
Right.
That's insane. Like, forget the $15 minimum wage. We gotta go to 20. Yeah. We gotta do that now. That's something the federal government can do. They can provide benefits for these jobs, and they can target communities that have been historically disenfranchised.
Right.
Think about unhoused people, man. Think about how many people, even in Denver, who, even if you're not unhoused, let's say you got arrested for minor marijuana possession 20 years ago, and you got a felony on your background for what shouldn't be a felony in this day and age.
Right.
That has been a barrier to getting a job your entire life. The federal government can come in and say that will not be a barrier to entry. You can work and you will have a job. We will train you, educate you to take that step forward. And so that is a complete vision for how you can transform not only Denver, but the entire country, because we know what's happening in Denver is also happening in Seattle, LA, Austin, New York, DC, Chicago. There is no state and no city that is experiencing or isn't experiencing what we're going through. And so I do think these types of policies can really change the lives of so many of us. And like, we should also talk about how these also impact communities of color in specific too.
Right.
Because what we know in Denver, for example, the black population of Denver right now is less than 5%. Do you know what percentage of black people occupy the unhoused demographic? Over 20%.
Wow.
How does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's crazy. When you're talking about health outcomes for women of color in a privatized healthcare system, when it comes to birth outcomes, maternal outcomes, all of these things, black women, indigenous women, Latinx women are experiencing death. Literally. White women are living. That is what it means to go into a hospital in our current system. So these important policies are economic, but they're also targeted for BIPOC communities, but also working class people. Like, we want people, not the wealthy, we want working class people to be able to succeed in this economy, but that's not happening.
I know you kind of dove into some of your experiences with racism at a younger age. What racism do you see nowadays, now that you're older, even maybe within politics and stuff like that?
Unfortunately, it feels like racism is present in multiple facets of society. So culturally, it feels alive and well. And I mean, we had a mass shooting in Buffalo, right? That was clearly inspired by white supremacy, and that's a part of American culture. That's something that happens every day. Even locally, things still happen. I mean, 2 years ago, my wife is Sikh, so in like Indian culture, Sikhism are people who have like the beards, the turbans, right? And oftentimes a lot of our people get seen as like Muslim or like whatever they think of as terrorists and stuff like that. And he has a liquor store in Lakewood actually, and this like just random dude walked in, took a look at him, started calling him like Arab terrorists, and like literally kicked the shit out of him. Put him in a hospital, broke his ribs, all that shit. So like that kind of stuff still happens, very, very much. And like, I mean, look, dude, like outside of that mass shooting, like AAPI violence is at an all-time high. Like all these things are still very much a part of this in Congress, especially. I mean, you got white nationalists who are being elected because they have white nationalist views. We have someone in our own state. I don't know if y'all follow Lauren Boebert down south, but she is a racist. Like in our own state, she's a Republican. She's effectively what I call the MAGA queen. But her platform is saying racist things all the time, and her voters love that. They eat it up, and they put her into office because of that. And for the record, she is a terrible person. She is not. For me, I don't think it matters if you have a certain kind of education background or whatever. I think actually people who don't have college degrees and stuff should be in Congress because I think they carry experiences with them that are not obviously served. But Lauren Boebert is an idiot. She lied about even getting a GED, right? Like, we're talking about someone who doesn't even have basic intelligence. And she's a white nationalist. And she's a racist. And that's what her whole platform is. It's just saying crazy shit. It's like that hype media stuff, you know? Like, it's just like social media, hype, like hip hop, all of it. It's like the more you can hype, the more it attracts people. And like, she's got zero substance, but she knows how to work that shit. And so there are so many things, man. But then, like, for me, the most detrimental are systems, right? Like, these are ingrained economic systems that exploit Black, brown, indigenous people, right? Like, we have a prison industrial complex that
it's basically like modern day slavery.
100%. That's exactly what it is. Prison industrial complex is modern day slavery. Do not fucking forget that. And it is because corporations are tied to our prison system. And what they do is they mass incarcerate people for fucking no reason. Then they put them in prison and they make them work. And then they exploit their labor by paying them $0 an hour to gross billions in dollars of profit. And that is why our prison system is the most aggressive in the entire world. There is a real money-making scheme attached to this complex. Right. And that's an example of systemic racism that is alive and well to this very day. And so, you know, whether it's culture, whether it's politics, whether it's just the economics of our country, it's everywhere, man. Like, our country is rooted in white supremacy, and that is just a fact.
What are some policies or things you feel like you can kind of help change that into the right direction?
For me, it's all about getting money into the hands of people. Like, I think that is the most transformational way. And it is a way to build equity, right? Like, within communities. Because, you know, like, words, culture, platitudes, like, that doesn't do anything anymore, right? And that's not what communities of color are asking for if you actually listen to them. Like, yeah, sure, like, say you're not racist, say Black Lives Matter, but, like, man, do you know how many people in Wash Park have a Black Lives Matter sign on their freaking lawn,
right,
but who work for companies and do things every day that literally oppress Black and brown people? It's like such a disconnect at this stage, right? Like, I'm happy to see us take steps forward culturally to try to say that we're not what we used to be, but, like, unless you're actually, again, creating equity within these communities, like, you're just saying things. You're not really doing much. Right. And so what can that look like? It can look like financial reparations, right? Like, I think that we have the ability as a country to create money and find ways for Black, indigenous, people of color who have been historically oppressed by slavery, white supremacy, all these things, to be compensated financially, right? Like, whether that looks like, you know, what MSU is doing, Metro State, they actually just created a program, right? That said, if you come from an indigenous background, you're not paying for your college education. Like, that is real equity right there, right? Or it could look like actually creating, like, look what happened to the marijuana industry here, man. Like, think about that for a second. We have an industry and a policing system that put Black people and brown people behind bars for a product that has now been turned into a profit scheme for rich white people. And in Colorado, we created no protection. We created no intentional investments to give Black and brown people a seat at the table as this industry built. And now when you go out into every single dispensary, like, there are so few Black-owned and brown-owned dispensaries here. 95% of them white-owned. That's insane to me. Like, why cannot we create space and carve out specific investments and spaces for these communities that have been historically oppressed by these types of systems? So there's so many things we could be doing, man. Like, there isn't just one thing, right? Like, whether it is educational investments, business investments, financial, like, investments directly into the pocketbooks of certain people, we can do that. We're just not, right? And so for me, I think that is something I'm hoping to champion when I'm elected, because, you know, there are a lot of people, of course, like, people of color in Congress who are advocating for these things, but we're still many, many votes away from that being reality. And so we need to lend this district's vote to those fights.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's respect. I want to dive into your story a little bit as well. What are some of your personal interests you know, this is a hip hop platform, so we want to hear some of your
man. Don't even get me started. Before I answer any of these, like who are my favorite, whatever. Like, let's also just start by saying your age determines who you think is the GOAT.
Okay.
Your experiences will, right? Like, I'm not gonna go and be like, Biggie, Tupac. Like, nah. Like, I don't respectfully, right? But I'll just like kind of like go over my like evolution into hip hop, which is like, you know, like when you grow up in this country and like you're listening to music, like for me, I always want to see myself in artists, you know, but they're not a lot of brown artists, at least like when I was growing up in hip hop. But there were so many like black artists, right? Like, and I just gravitated towards hip hop because I was like, oh, these people look like me, you know what I mean? But when I was younger, like it was always about like, man, like Eminem was popping when I was like, like junior high when I first started listening to music. It was Dre. I was listening to a lot of like Exhibit, a lot of like that West Coast kind of like, you know, that shit. But I think like my life changed literally when I heard Black on Both Sides by Mos Def, like out of nowhere. One person, like one of my friends was like, you gotta listen to this. And I was like, all right, let me hear it. And then like literally Miss Fat Booty was the first time. I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is not the same shit that I'm listening to, right? I mean, it was so intelligent. Such good storytelling, poetry, right? Like, there was so much that I was like, okay, there are levels to this game we play, right? And so from there, I think I really started to take more of an interest in like, I don't know, how old are y'all? I'm 34.
24.
Damn, y'all are young as hell. So look, I don't know if this is in your generation, but like I feel like, and I was talking about this with Josh, because like we still have like such a love for the past. You know, like we grow up and like, for me, it was like, okay, let me listen to the now, right? But then I was like, but now I got to go back. And that's when I really started diving into like Nas, Jay-Z, right? Listening to albums like Reasonable Doubt, Illmatic. Like I'm talking about the best, like arguably the best albums I still listen to this day.
Right.
So like those two artists for me, I think growing up, especially in like college, were the pinnacle. But like the person who I think changed it after that, and it was Kanye. Like, and I know Brother Ye has his challenges these days, man.
Yeah.
But like, I will never not give that man his dues. Like, that man is probably not just the best producer, but arguably the greatest MC I've ever listened to. And so, yeah, I don't know if you watched that documentary that they put out, right?
Oh, yeah.
But like, so important for me, man, to watch that because like I learned so much more about it. Like I do lean towards lyricists more than I do like club bangers and stuff. So like Cole, Jermaine, like top of the food chain for me. Of course Kendrick, you know, I don't know if you watched that most recent
that video.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
That was like one of the most powerful things I've ever gone through. Cause like for me, that wasn't just music, right? That was also a visual experience.
Right.
And when Jesse Smollett's like face came up, I was like, dude, it like hit me right here.
When I seen Kobe's face,
dude, like.
Yeah.
And then what did he say? He's like, I am all of us.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, that's like the most genius shit I've ever fucking seen him. You know, like, and it's like, so like, again, there are levels to this, right? It's not just, I do love Russ though. Like, I love Russ. Like, he's Chomp 2, probably like my favorite album of the year, I'd have to say. Last year? 2022. No, it came out this year. It came out this year. Yeah. But yeah, man, I got love for hip hop. I wish my people were better at it. Like I see a lot of Indians and brown men trying to do it. I'm like, you don't got the sauce, man. Like, go back to doing something else, man. Like, I don't know. It's because I feel like all my people want to be Drake. That's what I'm doing. I'm like, come on, man. And I love Drake. I love Aubrey. He's like one of my favorite like people, actors, entertainers. But like, you know, if I'm gonna listen to some rap, like I'm not going to Drizzy. You know, like I gotta.
More of a vibe. Like,
yeah. So those are some of the artists I really love. And like I was saying earlier, I think hip hop, in terms of just like roots and like spirit message, you know, so much revolution, you know, so much storytelling, so much history. And I think that kind of has inspired my like outlook on politics. It's like, I mean, I don't want to just be some run of the mill like everyday person, right? Like I want to embody the spirit of like people I loved, you know, growing up who like challenge things, you know. It's not just about being the status quo. It's about pushing it a step forward, you know.
I respect that. It's because it's, you know, even as a blog, like, you know, I'm pushing a lot of artists and stuff.
Oh yeah.
I see like, I feel like it's kind of hard to watch artists get fans, especially if they're like on a street level, because people might, assume things about them and what have you. And obviously not everything is great, but it's like at the same time, people are just telling their life story, you know what I'm saying? Like they're facing their struggle, and I look at it as like, how can you help get them out of that struggle? You know what I'm saying?
No, I like that, man. And I also think like it's so important to like change your attitude about hip hop as you grow up too, because like I feel like a lot of people in my age were like, oh, that's game sucks now, like fucking like, these young kids don't got anything to say. But I'm also like, man, like generations, right? Like you're talking about 90s, 80s, 2000s. You're talking about a legacy of hip hop that was inspired by the struggle, right? It was inspired by being oppressed, brutalized, like living in poverty, like then that reflected their music, right? But then like you grow up, and then when I listen to a lot of young black, brown kids, they're like, I don't want to listen to that anymore, man. Like, I know life is hard. Like, I don't need you to tell me, like, and it's like, and that's why that feel-good music is so prevalent, right? It's because it's a contrast to what you've been giving. And so, like, I don't know, man. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there are artists that I think are whack, like I'll never listen. Like, I don't fuck with people like Lil Pump, But I also don't think he's like, I don't think he really thinks of himself as an artist. I think he's more of like an entertainer, right? But, like, still, like, you got to change your definition of what hip hop is like every 5 years now, because like the game changes constantly. Oh yeah. Can't just like hate on people for evolving with the times, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, even since I first started listening to music, my taste has changed so much.
Always. Yeah.
But what I wanted to ask you before we get back into some political stuff, have you like tuned into any Colorado artists? Putting you on the spot here.
I'll say that back in the day, and I don't even know where this homie is right now, because I went to high school with this kid. His name was Turner Jackson. Okay. Do you know him? Man, he might not even be here anymore. But this was like
Jackson. I don't know if that.
Turner back in the day. He was dope, man. And this was also when I was like younger. So this is like we're going back. I'm trying to think of.
Can I put you on something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always looking for good music, man.
I was gonna say, if you like real lyrics,
I was gonna say, you already know. You're already at the top of the local list. I'm just gonna like rock out with you now. Like.
I mean, I feel like from what you've described, her music would definitely.
I love that. Conscious.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Nothing crazy. Nothing. I like boom bap. Like
I like that.
Hip hop. I like Lady Ray, Queen Latifah. Erykah Badu, Lauryn Hill's huge.
Yeah, I'm all. If that's where you're sourcing your inspiration from, then I feel like we'll align. Yeah. Who are the stars in the Denver music scene, man? Like,
I would say the artists that would definitely fit like your taste. You gotta look at They Call Him AP.
Okay.
Trev Rich. Those are kind of Those are two that are well known in the city and very lyrical, very conscious.
Do we have any like national talent? Because like when I was watching that Kanye documentary, right? What I recognized, I was like, damn, like look at how many like people from Shaw City like come out of that same crew, right? Like they're inspired by like that legacy. Same with New York, Cali, obviously different parts of Cali have their people, but I'm like, who are like the Denver? I mean, maybe it's you, right? Maybe you're creating it, but like, it wasn't created. Like we don't have like this.
Right now.
All right, that's right. Yeah, listen to Spinks. All right, like that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. I'll tell you what. Like I'll get your number. You should text me all these people, man, because I will definitely listen.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like the vision behind Mall High Mini is to like help. There's a lot of talented artists out here and stuff like that, studios, stuff like that. But
give them a platform.
Yeah, give them like a platform, because I feel like there's other platforms out here too. But I feel like when I first started, there weren't too many, so I feel like I can't.
I'm glad y'all are doing that, man. I mean, I'm glad you met the need, because I'm like, I know there has to be talent here. There's talent everywhere,
so much,
right? Like
they sound good too.
I bet. All right, cool, man. You're getting me excited now.
Yeah. Definitely, and I'll be doing promo and stuff for you as well on my page, so
Thank you, man.
We'll become familiar with each other. But to get back into some more topics that I feel like are pretty relevant right now, obviously gun control has been a huge one. My condolences to obviously the Buffalo shooting, and then the one that just happened in Texas. Every day.
I mean, it happens
it's
literally every day.
Happening too often at this point. So how do you feel like? What are some ideas, or how do you feel like we can kind of change, some of your ideas, but also as a society, to have a greater impact on that and like just lessen that stuff? Because it's crazy, it's mind blowing.
I know, man, and you've asked like such an important question, but it's also like how many times have we asked ourselves this very question, right? Like, I really think that we broke as a country back in Sandy Hook. Like not to say that Columbine and the Aurora shooting and all those things weren't absolutely heartbreaking, but I think
like we weren't worried. Like when I went to elementary school, I wasn't really worried too much about that. Nowadays, it's like
I think everybody should be worried, man. Yeah. I mean, like it doesn't matter if you're in I mean, that's like that's the most tragic part.
Right.
You can be in an elementary school, you can be in a movie theater, you can go grocery shopping in Boulder, Colorado, and your life is potentially at risk, right? And I think like Sandy Hook could have been that moment. Like, if not elementary school kids, like what are you going to change, right? And now at this stage, I mean, it literally happened again, right? So, I don't want to. The hardest part about this is, as a politician, as a public servant, like you're supposed to have the answers, right? Like you're supposed to be the one to say, here's what we can do. Here's like a gesture of hope. Here's a path forward. But I don't know if there is one. And that's like an honest answer, man. Don't get me wrong. Like, there are clear policies that we can be implementing. We know what they are.
Right.
We know bigger universal background checks, better storage laws. Let's ban assault rifles. Like these are ideas that are circulated. We are aware of what we should be doing.
Right.
But that's not the problem. It is doing it that is the problem. I'll say Colorado as a state does a good job. They have this thing called red flag laws where, they can confiscate your guns if you exhibit certain, traumatic patterns of behavior. Because, obviously we have that conversation of mental health a lot. And, if people see you as being harmful to yourself, like we have the authority in our state to say, hey, don't have a gun.
Right.
Colorado is not nationwide though, right? And so there are things that I'm committed to doing, right? Like, I think at the end of the day, we should always advocate for greater regulations, no matter what.
Oh, yeah.
I think that for me, though, we have to talk about white supremacy. We have to talk about the fact that gun violence and white supremacy are connected because, we look at the mass shooters of our generation and there are very distinct commonalities, right? These are people who are being inspired by a culture of propaganda, of disinformation, but these sources are people who are trying to create a culture of violence in this country, right? So that's a big piece of it. That's a harder conversation for me to navigate because it is very challenging to think about how do you combat disinformation in which you've got a million news sources and people are telling you a million different things and you can go online and hear one thing. Like that's a cultural problem. But it comes back to like money and politics, man.
Right.
Like everything comes back to money and politics because the NRA owns the Republican Party and they own the Senate. And if you do not have the Senate voting, then nothing will happen. I mean, there are some Democrats in the House who are anti-regulation, right? And that's because of their pocketbooks, right? So, the problem is deep-rooted. And the reason we don't do things, again, it's by design.
Right.
We buy our politicians. They are there for the very same purpose, which is to prevent these things from happening. And it's going to keep happening, man. Like, I admire Beto, for confronting that governor in Texas. And we need more of that. We need people to stand up. But, systemically, it's hard for me to really offer a solution of hope because we've been here. And the thing that makes me sad is we're going to be here again and again and again. Like, this is America, So
That's real.
It's our sickness. Yeah.
I feel like I feel like we all kind of know what needs to happen, but it just doesn't happen because, like you said, it all comes down to the politics and the money behind it. Like, I feel like there obviously needs to be more regulation. I mean, we can implement some of the laws and rules that you may see in other countries and stuff. Probably won't happen as much. But then again, it's just like you said, And I'm no politician by any means, but like.
But you don't have to be, man.
Right.
You've lived it. You've lived it. You don't need a politician to tell you what needs to be done at this stage.
Right.
Like, those days are over. But, until we elect good people, which is hard, until we get money out of politics, which is harder, the status quo is going to prevail. Yeah. So,
I just have hope that like push comes to shove, and at some point, like there's no choice but to change, and like that's my hope. At some point, it may not be in our lifetimes, maybe.
Amen. My hope is there too. Like, and also the mission never changes, right? We'll always fight.
Right.
But I also think the time for trying to say things are going to get better, like, we have to be honest with ourselves, you know, before we can take a real step forward. So. Right. I hope we continue maintaining your optimism, man. Like, we need that. we need that. Like, there's no doubt we need to keep believing that it's possible. Right. So.
But yeah, no, I respect the answers. What is your view on abortion?
Yeah. Abortion is healthcare. It's a human right. And I think that as men, particularly progressive men, we have to do a better job of being a real ally on this conversation. And, it comes... You'll hear me repeat this over and over again, right? Like, it always comes down to money. Right. Because what we have in D.C. is a situation where you have the same corporations who are giving money to Democrats, but then are also going and funding Republicans who are voting against abortion as health care. And they're also financing anti-choice political action committees. And again, we're creating the problems that we're trying to solve. So a lot of this is theater, right? And so, and this is another big difference between me and my opponent. And this is like the thing that's crazy about this is that my opponent, rightfully so, throughout the course of her career, has been considered one of the leading voices on this topic, right? And she's helped create the space for this conversation to take place. She's the chair of what's called the pro-choice caucus, right? So her leadership on this is important. But my opponent has also taken $30,000 this cycle alone from corporations that are funding the things that I was just talking about, right? And we were in a debate earlier this week, and she was like, well, it's never purchased my vote. Like, I always vote in favor of pro-choice things. And I was like, man, with all due respect, like, your vote is one vote. This is a system.
Right.
And the corporate system that is poisoning our politics is buying all of the votes that are going against your vote. So, like, with all due respect, yes, thank you for voting the right way. Thank you for creating this space, but you are a part of the problem now too. And again, like, the money situation will come back every issue that we're talking about, because that is truly where all of this is rooted in. And, it's tough, man, because there are other things we should be talking about too. Because, one, like Colorado, we actually codified reproductive rights into our state law, right? That's great, because even if Roe versus Wade falls, people can still come to Colorado and access the services that they need. It is a privilege to be in this state in a lot of ways, but what we're not talking about is the fact that the exorbitant cost of healthcare, even if you have access, is still going to be a barrier for the people who need those services the most. Because what we know is that Black, Indigenous women of color, people of color, if you can still access an abortion, but it is still bankrupting you, you still can't access these things. So until we not only create access through codifying reproductive rights, but change the healthcare system in this country, this problem will continue to perpetuate itself. But, my stance is very much that abortion is a human right, and we should be protecting that with everything that we have.
Okay. Yeah. What are some ways, I know this kind of relates back to an earlier question, but what are some ways you feel like you can have a positive impact on violence in Denver?
Violence is a product of our environment, right? let's also acknowledge that felonizing people for violent behavior, giving more money to police, has never made us safer as a country. Police departments have bigger budgets than they've ever had in the history of this country.
Yeah.
And yet outcomes for communities are worse than they've ever been.
Right.
So this illusion that more money into police is going to solve our problems, that arresting people is going to solve our problems, is a broken idea. So if we accept that, then the question should become, how do we change the outcomes for our communities? And that is rooted in creating housing, right? Increasing healthcare access, improving the quality of education, especially in a place like Denver. DPS is breaking in front of our very eyes. And I think if we can invest into our neighborhoods, our communities, and change these types of our lives, then I think my hope is these outcomes will actually start to change in the long run. But I certainly do not believe that more police and more arrests are really gonna change the tide. Yeah, it's tough.
I like that you look deeper into like more of the root cause rather than just on paper like let's arrest more.
Yeah, man.
Like, I mean, like that's the easy way out. A lot of people who might be blind.
I'll say this. I think what gives me hope is that like younger people like yourself, people in our age demographic, and even people who are a little bit older, like we've seen this play out so many times where I think the tide is turning. But there are still too many people who do believe in like more police, more jails and stuff like that. And so the fight will still be long. But, we've had small steps forward in recent times. And I'm hoping as people like you all get more involved and become louder, like these things hopefully change. But, we have work to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Always work to do. Okay, cool. How can we help small businesses? Or what are some of the policies that you believe in that could help small businesses?
Great question, man. And like, let's also frame the challenge that's happening here in Denver. And like, COVID certainly enhanced this, but we've seen so many amazing small businesses that I think have like created such like amazing culture in their neighborhoods. Like they've shut down, right? And that's rooted in some of the things we were talking about earlier, right? One, the cost of real estate is skyrocketing, right? The small business owner cannot afford that. What's also challenging is that in Denver, think about this. In the city of Denver, one person owning a business can be considered a small business. 499 people.
That's huge.
Believe me, man, I know. And this is what I think is also a part of the problem. For me growing up, small businesses look like a mom and pop owned gas station, a restaurant, maybe a liquor store, right? It's not like a mechanism to get rich as fast as you can.
Right.
It's a place to build something for your family, create a neighborhood vibe, something like a small economy for people to participate in. But what we've done in Denver by kind of creating that range is you're essentially saying, okay, small business owner, you now need to compete with the 400-person company. And I don't care what you call it. A 400-person company it's a company or it's a corporation.
Yeah.
And these corporations, they have the resources, the financing, the relationships into government to leverage that in their favor. And that's coming at the cost of the small business owner who does not have the same kind of access. And so there are some things that I think we can do, at least federally, to change this tide. This is why I believe in healthcare as a human right so much, because what these corporations have figured out now is that, okay, I can not only pay for healthcare because we get a bunch of tax breaks and vouchers and financial incentives that make paying for healthcare as a company way cheaper, but we can pay our employees $20 an hour, and we can even say you don't even need a college degree to work here anymore, right? And if you're the American worker and you're coming back from a pandemic chapter, you need a thriving wage, you need healthcare, and you need benefits. And who's offering that? It's the corporation. So the worker is going to be attracted to that, right? And that comes at the cost of the small business owner who can't pay for healthcare. I mean, so many small business owners who are like, I want to pay $17 an hour. I want to give my employees healthcare, but it'll literally shut me out. And so for me, if you take healthcare off the books of companies and you make it universally accessible, that creates competition. That gives freedom to the worker who's like, well, maybe I'll go do something else. Maybe I'll work and start my own podcast. Maybe I'll start my own store. Maybe I'll join this, coffee shop. But at least, you get the freedom to make those choices. So those are some of the things I think about a lot when it comes to small business. And of course, like, we have to create intentional investments for these small business owners to leverage, whether that's in the form of a loan that's specifically targeting them, or other some kind. Like I said, man, corporations get so many tax breaks to be able to pay for things so cheaply that if we could just kind of shift that and allow the small business owner to benefit in the same way, then I think we can preserve a part of Denver's culture that is making that makes Denver super cool, right? Like, I don't ever want to not walk into Whittier Cafe, down in Whittier, because they got priced out. Like, I want to always be able to walk into the spots that I love. Like, one of the most historic institutions in 5 Points, Welton Street Cafe, right? I mean, you're talking about a business that's been around for almost 30 years, who have helped build that neighborhood, who have really rooted themselves in the community. Like, even they got priced out, man. Right. And I'm like, we're losing things that make Denver very special. And it's a good question, though, because it's important. Like, we have to preserve that. So, yeah.
You kind of started to touch on, some local restaurants. I know Main Street is a huge one out here in the 5 Points.
Yeah.
What are some of the neighborhoods, communities, and restaurants and stuff that you love?
Yeah, always got. That's like the best part about Denver, right? Like, if you know the history of this city, there are such good cultures, communities that you can be a part of. I think, like, what's tough is that you've got to find it. I used to live in DC for like 5 years, and like the thing I loved about DC is I would walk out in any place and it was Chocolate City, right? And people from all over the world are just like in front of you, and like that's cool, right? Denver is a little different. Like, if you know where to go, you can find the culture, but the culture is not readily accessible. And so if you want to talk about North Denver, the North Side, like OG, Latino, Chicano, like the roots of the North Side have so much to offer. But like, I'm also like a simple person, so like I'll rock into Chubby's, and I'll still have like a good burger. I'm like, yeah, I'm down with Chubby's and places like that, right? Like, that's cool. I do think like some people who move into the North Side community are trying to like not just take over space, but like share space and let people use it. Like, have you been to that spot called the Radiator? Yeah, it's cool because like it's kind of newer, BIPOC owned, not like historic, but I've seen a lot of cool like community events take place there, and like people who are like, so it's nice to see things like that happening. So like, that's great. Trying to think of some other spots. If you go to like West Denver, oh man, like I could eat pho every single day. There's no doubt. And like, we got a strong Vietnamese community here, right? So like, you walk into Pho Dui like any given Sunday, man. Like, that place is amazing. I do love like the Far East Center and like that little Saigon community, man. Like, really cool people who operate some stores down there. A lot of people who have given us support on the campaign trail. 5 Points still.
They used to say it was like the Harlem of the West.
You wouldn't know that now, man. Right. Can't even tell. They still got wall art and stuff like that shows that. Still got a lot of good graffiti, but all those spots have been boarded up now, man. They're getting driven out. There's all these developers coming in trying to repurpose that shit. Like, and what's crazy is that it's also like BIPOC people who are being like, who are engaging in that predatory behavior. You know what I mean? Like, there was a big story that came out that like, I think the person and the investors that pushed out Welton Street were black investors, you know what I mean? And like, or brown investors, like, and I'm like, man, that's hard, because like, obviously I of course will put my trust into people who look like me and come from, but like, that's not the game anymore, right? People just want to make money, and if you're not serving their pocketbook, man, they'll throw you out like trash like that. But Whittier Cafe, one of my favorite spots. If you haven't been there, it's in the Whittier neighborhood, very close to 5 Points. It is like a very political spot too, which is like obviously where I gravitate to. But it's not like party politic or like status quo state. I mean, like it's like revolutionary people who are like down for the struggle and cause. Like those are places I really, really love.
Okay.
In Denver, man, I'm trying to think of other spots. Man, you're putting me like I live in South Broadway right now, right off of Broadway in Mississippi, and like when I was growing up and coming to party in Denver and stuff, like you would never be there. That was where the Gates Rubber Factory used to be. It was like all industry, like no residential stuff, you know, like. But like now, oh man, there are so many spots, like great restaurants, cool culture. You know, I love walking into like Maria Empanada. Like that's literally down the street from my apartment though. So like that's a good spot to be and stuff. But I don't know, Denver has a lot to offer, and so like if people are looking for the culture, you know, go to the North Side, right? Go to Five Points, go to West Denver. You know, I do appreciate being in neighborhoods like Green Valley Ranch, Montbello, and stuff like that. But like, what's hard to see is like all these historic communities are just getting priced out, man. Like in downtown Denver, y'all ever heard of Sakura Square? Yeah, right. So there's a block in Denver, a block now, on 19th and Larimer. I think it's between those streets. It's called Sakura Square. Used to be a very historic, like Japanese American.
I think I heard about like an old Chinatown they used to have.
They used to have that. This was way back in the day, right? But even Japanese Americans, for a little bit of history lesson, Governor Carr of Colorado once upon a time was one of the few governors post-World War II who said, we're not going to do internment camps here. So if you're Japanese American and you want to come here and build a family and a community, like we will treat you as people, not as prisoners. So there was a very large Japanese American community that was here, and what is now one block used to be like 7 or 8. And it's just, that's like the sad story of what Denver is, man. Like gentrification, especially like uncontrolled gentrification. I mean, it takes out the old, you know, and it replaces it with the Sprouts and the Starbucks. And that sucks, you know, if I can be frank. Like, I hate seeing that. Man, too many Starbucks, indeed.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I have one more question, and then
let's do it.
I'll get out of your hair.
I don't even have hair, man. That's fucked up. Huh?
You gotta try What the Pho.
The Pho?
It's called What the
What the Pho? Where is it at?
It's off it's close by Broadway.
Okay.
I forgot what street.
I mean, that's so easy.
It's by that Walmart, and it's in the shopping center. Walmart, then there's Petco.
Oh, yeah. I know that area. Okay. It's good though?
Damn. Yeah, that's like the spot. I try to go everywhere else, but
that's the one for you?
I live in Westminster now. I go all the way down there to get some fun.
Damn, dude.
I'm asleep on pho. I mean, it's alright.
Do you, bro?
I like that hot pot place though in Aurora.
Hot pot's amazing.
That place is fire.
You just put sriracha in yours? You gotta put
I've had pho like once, and it was like 4 or 5 years ago.
Damn, bro.
I didn't
we'll go on a field trip, man. We'll put you on some good stuff. Yeah. I was like, you said you had it once? Come on, man. Like, what are you talking about?
I probably should try
chili
it
oil or hot oil.
Yeah, you gotta put that good stuff.
Some chili sauce, chili oil. Okay. This just has to do with politics and rap, so I wanted to ask you this.
Okay.
So the New York Senate just passed a bill that will limit prosecutors using song lyrics and other forms of creative expression as evidence in criminal cases.
Sorry, were they doing that?
So yeah, that's for example, Young Thug and YSL.
Oh man, they're in trouble, man. yeah.
And then actually, this just happened to a Denver rap group as well. I don't want to name I don't want to throw them on the bus, but yeah. How do you feel about basically rap music being used in criminal cases and stuff like that?
I think it's terrible. Like rap music is art, you know, and it's exactly right. And if people are expressing themselves, if they're storytelling, and look, we understand that some lived experiences are honestly communicated through music, but I also think that artists also paint pictures in ways that may not necessarily be the exact same thing that happened, right? But that should never be used against a human being, especially if it's in relation to producing music. you know, and also like I'm assuming that the labels have profited off of the music they've made, and now you're throwing the artists away like they're trash. Like, I mean, that's terrible, man.
That's
and like, it also sounds racist if I'm being honest. But like, you know, I didn't know that was happening, man. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Good for New York. I'm glad that they took that step, but it's like horrifying to think that was something that was being used. I mean, I guess I did know that, man. They did that to all the artists back in California back in the day, man. Like I didn't know that. I guess I didn't realize it was still prevalent.
More prevalent right now.
Jesus.
And you don't really see. I mean, are we gonna just act like metal and rock music doesn't talk about some crazy stuff?
I didn't even think about it like that. Yeah, like people say wild shit in all music genres. Damn, you're right. That's racist as hell, man. Yeah. That's crazy.
It's crazy.
That's crazy.
It's just like you said, people are painting a picture and living these things. And I don't know. I just want to bring that up, see what you thought about it.
Man, people love to grap about hip hop just because it's like BIPOC music, man. And also like I get it. Like some things are raunchy. You know, I was watching that Cardi B interview with David Letterman. Have you seen it?
I seen the one with Joe Biden.
Dude, y'all gotta watch it. It's on Netflix. He has that show. It's called "And My Next Guest" or something.
Okay.
And he's interviewed like Kanye, Chappelle, like great interviews, right? Hour-long interviews, and he brings Cardi on. And obviously she's like amazing and all that stuff. I literally watched this like 2 nights ago with my wife. And then, David Letterman is like an older white man, kind of like grandpa status at this point. He's like, he's like, wet ass pussy, huh? Wow. And, she's like, yeah. And, it was just funny because she was just like, I don't even understand like why people give a shit about this kind of thing. And I agree, right? Like, don't get me wrong. When I heard that song for the first time, I was like, God damn, dude, that's just like, that's raw, But
you're not gonna play that in certain.
Yeah, but like I didn't like take it beyond that, right? I wasn't like vendetta. Oh, we shouldn't be saying this. This is gross. Like, I don't really care about that. And even she acknowledged and was like, man, this isn't even the nastiest song that's been created, let alone in hip hop, but especially by like women in hip hop. Like. Freaky songs have been ingrained in hip-hop culture, but like, she comes out and puts something out with Megan Thee Stallion, and all of a sudden it's like a national issue that we gotta be thinking about, man. That's just garbage, bro. Like, and it's again, I think it just has to do with the fact that like, there's some elements of race in there, but I also just think like, I don't know, it's classist as well, stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, this has been a legendary interview.
Thanks, man. This is cool. I'm looking to see it chopped up and all that. I'm assuming we're not going to... What do you typically do? Like, is it... Like, what's the ideal time you cut it into?
So...
Like an hour?
No, it'll probably be, I want to say between like an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Damn, man, that's heavy. Yeah.
I'll definitely chop it up, though, cut out any parts where we kind of messed up.
Yeah, would love to like...
You want to watch it first before I drop it?
I trust you, man. Okay. I'd love to use some of the clips.
Oh, yeah,
like, and, do it on our own and then help us promote each other, Like,
yeah, of course. I actually really appreciate that because a lot of times I interview people and I'm like, hey,
you want to shout me out? Yeah. Throw me some love, man.
Yeah. And then it's like, no. Well, they'll say yeah, and then they don't. I'm like,
nah,
I get it. But at the same time, it's like, if we both promote it, it'll do that much better.
Oh, of course, man. And then hopefully you gain some visibility, and that's cool, man.
Use both of each other's
that's what it's all about, man.
To reach
that's all it's about, man. And like, let's keep in touch because like if y'all are doing events and stuff like that or anything, like we're down to come down and support.
Okay.
Like wanna make sure bring my friends who listen to good music down here and try to throw some money y'all's way and stuff like that.
I'll definitely follow you and make sure we keep it going.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
No problem. I appreciate you. Do you have any final thoughts, any shout outs, any last?
Yeah, I'll just say, like if you're watching this out in Denver, like first register to vote. The nice thing about being in Colorado is that they'll mail your ballot home. And so whether you're an unaffiliated voter, whether you're a Democrat, register to vote. And about 2 weeks before the June 28th Democratic primary, you'll get that in your mail and then you can participate. And we have a real opportunity right now to make history in our district. And, I've said this a few times, like we're trying to become the first person of color to ever represent us. But, we've talked so much about the corporate influence on society and politics. And what's also important to me is knowing that we'll be the only federal candidate who's never taken corporate money. And we'll be in office if we win. And so there are a few moments that come up where you can shift the paradigm. You know, you can really take a step forward and kind of do something that I think is positive and altruistic and really like of the people. And so I hope I can count on your vote. My name is Neal Walia. I'm a progressive Democrat, and I'm running for Congress in the 1st Congressional District here in Denver, Colorado. That's it.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Make sure you guys go follow Neal on everything, all links, social media will be in the description.
Absolutely.
Make sure you go vote.
Yes.
Make sure we shout to sponsor today's video, 3 AM water. Go get the hydration for the go-getters.
It's delicious.
And yeah, make sure you guys hit that like button, comment down below.
Yes, like, comment, follow, do everything. Yeah. And we'll be promoting y'all as well. So thank you again.
Yes, sir. Hit that subscribe button. And I think that just about wraps it up.
And follow Spinks. Denver's best. Denver's best. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Shout out for Maha Minute one time.
Yo, and shout out to the Maha Minute. Shout out to Spinks, Josh, everybody involved. This is what community looks like. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Maha Minute, #1 podcast in the universe.